Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala program in linguistics. I am Pramod Pandey, Center for Linguistics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Today we are going to discuss the module on Abstractness Controversy 2. In the previous module we looked at Abstractness Controversy 1, where we dealt with various cases of abstractness controversy. There are 4 degrees of abstractness as we observed. One of non-alternating forms, there's only slight phonetic variation in the different forms of a morpheme. The other is regular alternating forms, where the one of the forms is posited as underlying and the other is predictable by rule. And the third one is abstract forms in for certain forms justifiable on the grounds that they follow a certain general rule and they have some unique features. For example, the third type, in this last type that we mentioned, in English, for example, we have the case of sing being sing throughout. Sing, singing, singer. Now, there are other cases where the phoneme g at the end of words is actually found present in some form, like hang, and then hanger is another word which is related to hang, hanging. And in most cases, we find that wherever there is a nasal having the same place as the following voiced obstruent, the voiced obstruent is deleted in some form and is present in another form. In the word sing, singer, singing, however, it seems that somehow the form sing always is the stem that is sort of occurs with the other morphemes such as and ing. So g doesn't surface. But the velar nasal in this case is predictable on account of assimilation. Another case of German that you have in the e-text, Abstractness Controversy 1, is that of a certain generalization within German which deals with obstruent devoicing at the end of words. Like, so you have bund, bunt, but when a vowel is added, it is bundes. So you know that t and d are related. In this case, there is never a case that there is a voiced obstruent at the end of words. So forms such as bunt and tag, etc. are well motivated. Now, wherever we have at the end of a word voiceless obstruents such as t or k, they can have 2 sources, either t itself or k itself, or another that is d or g. You have to find out which of them is in the underlying representation of a morpheme. So in a word such as bunt, bundes, we say d is the underlying form. Why? Because d occurs in the alternating form. There is an alternation between t and d. Sometimes there is no alternation between t and d. There is only t occurring everywhere. When there is t occurring everywhere, then the underlying form also has t. Now, the problem with the German form such as tag and tages, as has been pointed out by some phonologists, is this: that on the surface you get k, but you don't get a g. The g is found as a fricative, something like r. So you have tak and tages, not tages, but as tages. Now, the underlying form for tak and tages is proposed to contain a g there, following a general rule of devoicing. But how do you explain tages, the form tages? You have to assume that there is a case of spirantization of g from g to h, which applies only to g and not to other obstruents. So, d does not become z, g alone becomes g in certain forms. So, this level of abstractness seems to be justifiable in some form. We have also certain other cases of abstractness that seem to be acceptable. Last of the cases of degrees of abstractness that we discussed in the last module, namely positing a segment in the underlying form that never surfaces in the language or in any of its alternating forms. This was found in the case of English analysis of words such as right as something like riecht, a long vowel followed by a velar fricative ch. Then there were certain rules proposed where ch, the long vowel, becomes a diphthong and ch is finally deleted, and so on the surface you get right, but you don't have any kind of relation between right and riecht at all. So this kind of relationship is considered to be a case of abstractness that does not seem to be very justifiable. However, let's take a look at some cases where the underlying representation can have forms, segments that do not occur on the surface in the language, and yet they seem to be justifiable on grounds of general analysis of the language. Some of these cases are found in languages such as Hungarian and Polish, among other languages. Let's take a look at the case of Hungarian vowel harmony. Look at the data on your screen. In Hungarian, we have the suffix having two forms, one the fronted form like öl and the other non-fronted form like ol. So there is an alternation between back rounded o and front rounded ö. So ol and öl. Now you see that the data clearly shows that in all those cases where we have the front vowel in the stem, the suffix has a fronted vowel öl. However, we find that in the language there are also cases where we have the back vowel ol occurring after the front vowel in the stem. So you may have an a, but the suffix has o. Now e, the suffix has o. Now this doesn't seem to be very well justifiable, explainable. However, we can treat them. There are two ways to solve this problem. One is to say that these are exceptions because there are enough cases of the generality of vowel harmony, of backness vowel harmony, where the suffix vowel is front minus back when the stem has minus back vowel. However, the cases of the dissimilarity in the backness of the vowels of the suffix and the stem are far too many, about 60 of them in the language, as we are told, that seem to form a group. Now, to treat such a large number of alternating forms as exceptions seems to be totally avoidable it would be better for us to find a general solution, a principled solution to the problem, instead of treating them as exceptions. So if you have back unrounded vowel, what can be said or what has been suggested is that the back unrounded vowel becomes minus back. This is by rule. So the suffixation is regular. You have O there, but the stem vowel is now has been changed to a front vowel, so that this is a change from an earlier back vowel. Now, because the earlier form had a back vowel, so the suffix has a back vowel in it, the stem back vowel has been changed to a front vowel. This is a later change. Now, if we explain the underlying forms of these vowels which have a mismatch between the stem and the suffix vowel in terms of a phonological rule which changes minus back vowel to a plus back vowel to a minus back vowel, then we have a very regular account of all these forms of vowel harmony in Hungarian. Now, cases like vowel harmony in Hungarian do seem to involve abstract forms which never occur on the surface. So in present-day Hungarian, there is no back unrounded vowel today. These are two in number. One is short and the other is long. However, for the case of the alternation and for the variation in the vowel harmony cases, it is necessary for a phonologist to posit a segment which never occurs on the surface and yet explains the phonological alternations amongst these forms. Now, having looked at the various cases of abstractness and the possibility of justifying some of the even extreme cases, we now turn to proposals that have raised objection to very abstract forms and that have given rise to abstractness controversy. How Abstract is Phonology is the title of the paper by Paul Kiparsky, which was very influential. It is he who raised for the first time the importance of a need to constrain abstractness of phonological representations. As we said earlier, this was needed because if phonological rules are allowed to relate the phonetic forms to any underlying form, then there is no end to abstractness. You can propose any rule to be a viable rule in a grammar and then propose an abstract form that never surfaces. So Kiparsky questioned this and thought that it is for the sake of psychological reality of grammars, it is necessary to propose only those underlying forms that can be accepted as psychologically real. Remember that this controversy relates to the main goal of generative phonology, which is to explicate the phonological knowledge of the native speaker. Now, if we have posit two abstract forms, then the question arises, do the native speakers of the language actually accept them as psychologically real forms? Now, Kiparsky thought that in order to put a kind of a restraint on the abstractness of forms, it is necessary to have a condition such as alternation condition. The alternation condition, as stated by Kiparsky, says that a form which is proposed at the underlying representation must be found to occur on the surface. In this, in order to justify the alternation condition, Kiparsky allowed, however, the use of some diacritic features as phonological features or phonological features as diacritic features. However, he put a strong kind of emphasis on the need to have something like the alternation condition. In the course of time, Kiparsky's understanding of abstractness grew, and then what we find is that he proposed another form in place of alternation condition. According to Kiparsky, neutralization rules should not in general be allowed except in derived forms. So Kiparsky came to this condition that only derived forms could have absolute neutralization. Remember, absolute neutralization means neutralization between forms where the distinction between two forms is entirely lost on the surface. For example, the Hungarian vowel, rounded vowel, and the non-back vowel, rounded vowel. There is no such distinction visible on the surface. So, according to Kiparsky, such rules were motivated only if there is a complex form and you think that the rule, a phonological rule, which changes in all cases a segment into another segment, could be allowed. In addition to Kiparsky's alternation condition and the neutralization rule derived environment condition, there was a major proposal in phonological theory which has come to be known as natural generative phonology. Natural generative phonology. The goal of natural generative phonology was the same as that of Kiparsky's alternation condition and the derived environment condition, namely to constrain the abstractness of phonological forms. This was proposed by Joan Hooper, also known as Joan Bybee Hooper, who proposed certain constraints on the occurrence of surface forms and the relation between the surface form and the underlying form. She proposed a constraint known as true generalization condition. This is similar to the alternation condition, except that what this condition says is that any form is acceptable as underlying form if it is found to occur on the surface. So repeat from true generalization condition, which is now explained differently. The true generalization condition of Joan Hooper says that no generalization is true unless it is found to be on the surface. So if there is a phonological rule proposed in the grammar, then the phonological rule must be seen to be at work on the surface. This, according to Hooper, was very necessary and important to restrain the abstractness of forms. In addition to this, according to Hooper, very abstract representations were proposed mainly because of rules being allowed to be extrinsically ordered. So you propose a rule and then you say two rules and then you say one rule must be ordered before another rule. And this is something that is imposed from outside compared to intrinsic ordering, where a rule follows from another rule, as we have seen in the module on rule ordering. So according to Hooper, no extrinsic ordering is allowed in grammars. Hooper made a distinction between three types of rules. She called them P rules, that is phonological rules proper, MP rules or morphophonemic rules, and via rules. Now the first two types of rules, namely P rules and MP rules, were already known in the literature, especially the structural phonological literature, where rules were found to be either phonetically conditioned, for phonologically conditioned, or morphologically conditioned. Also rules which were lexically conditioned. Now, Joan Hooper gives them new kind of names to these classifications and justifications, and tries to show that the phonology must necessarily contain mainly phonological rules proper. Examples of P rules proper are rules such as, for example, aspiration in English, where you give the condition, phonological condition, for such a rule. For example, the aspiration rule in English says that if a voiceless obstruent such as p, t, k occurs initially in a stressed syllable when not preceded by s, then it is aspirated. Now, this is a purely phonetically conditioned rule. If you have a rule which says, let us say, before or after some phonological segments, say between two segments, such as between two vowels, etc., then it is a P rule proper. For example, in Hindi, there is a rule, general rule of retroflexion, of flapping, where d becomes r. So the phonological conditions are that between two vowels, and also at the end of words. Now, this is a phonological condition. Whenever d occurs between two vowels, then d changes to r, as in ghoda and peda and ghadi and so on and so forth. Now, when there are no two vowels, but let us say a consonant and a vowel, then this doesn't happen. For example, n, d and like khand, it doesn't become khandra. So the phonological condition of what precedes and what follows in terms of phonological segments, this is what is P rules proper. As compared to this, we have morphophonemic rules. As I said, these were seen to be morphologically conditioned rules. For example, the English plural rule. Only in the case of the plural suffix or some grammatical suffixes like having to do with has, etc., in the shortened form or the possessive, that z changes to s, we are told, after voiceless sounds other than s, sh, and ch. So, except for s, sh, and ch, whenever the plural morpheme occurs in the form z, it is changed to s. However, after s, sh, ch, and z, zh, j, you always have an is form occurring as a realization of the plural morpheme z. In all other forms, we get the plural morpheme z. For example, bags and bars, and then let us say a word such as widows or whatever words you have. If the context is other than s, sh, ch, z, zh, j, then it changes to s after s, sh, and ch. But the point about morphophonemic rule here is that it applies to those morphemes which are supposed to have the underlying form z in them. So it is not something like a general phonological rule, but a morphophonemic rule dealing with the alternation of morphemes, let's say suffixes, affixes, etc. Now, compared to these two rules, there is a third rule which earlier we called them lexically conditioned rules. Hooper calls them via rules, which do not require, which are not really rules proper. They simply relate to different lexically related forms, such as divine and divinity, where we will say that the relation between them is a double arrow relationship. Divine relates to divinity, divine of divinity, and divine of divinity relates to divine. There is no relation of underlying representation and surface phonetic representation. Both are equally abstract or equally concrete. In this case, both are surface forms, following the true generalization condition. So, although the proposals of natural generative phonology were found to be very interesting and significant when they were first made, but on close scrutiny, as more and more came to be learned about phonological rules and generalizations, they came to have many objections to natural generative phonology. There were three main objections to natural generative phonology that we can list here. One has to do with the necessity to have extrinsic rule ordering. Now, there are cases which have been reported in literature, such as the Canadian dialects, two dialects, where the languages differ with regard to the application of two rules differently. There are these forms such as writer, as we say, rider, as we say in Indian English, so writer, rider. Now these forms have two different kinds of pronunciations in a language, in the dialects of Canadian English. So we are told that in one case there is a rule of vowel lengthening and another case, or vowel shortening in one case, and there is also a case of vowel raising. So in one case we have I becoming I, and another, so we have I versus I as one case, and then t becoming the as another case. So there's a voicing case, or flapping case of t, d becoming the as in rider, and there's also a case of vowel shortening. Now, so we have in one dialect it will be like the two forms are exactly the same in terms of the diphthong and the flap. So writer and rider both will be something like rider, whereas in another dialect one will be rider, the other will be rider. Now the explanation is in terms of extrinsic ordering between the two dialects. We have looked at these forms in the module on rule ordering, so we need not repeat here, but you should be able to recall how these dialects are explained to have differences on account of extrinsic rule ordering. So in all these cases where there is extrinsic rule ordering necessary to explain differences amongst dialectal forms, it seems that the objection to extrinsic rule ordering may probably not hold. The other case was about the psychological reality of abstract forms such as sing, occurring always as sing, singing, singer, and there is nothing that occurs on the surface. So when you say that g is dropped after ng, after a nasal, then there should be some way to see that g is dropped after nasal and in these forms, but there is no way in which it can be seen. However, if you ask a native speaker of English whether he or she accepts sing, sing, on the surface sing, and in the abstract sing, then most native speakers of English do not seem to have any problem accepting the abstract form as sing, which results in the surface phonetic form sing. Yeah. And lastly, the difference between P rules and MP rules, the need to separate them requires that phonological rules must have duplication in the phonological grammar, an issue that was well addressed by Maurice Haller in his paper called Phonology in Generative Grammar. So the separation would lead to be a kind of a non-economic grammar, a less simple grammar than one in which phonological rules and MP rules are allowed to occur in the same module, and where no distinction is made between them. To summarize, in this module, we have gone on to look again at those cases of abstractness and tried to find some ways to justify some of those cases. For example, Hungarian vowel harmony, an extreme case of abstractness, and which seems to be acceptable in the phonological analysis of Hungarian, but which seems to go against the general requirement for something like a restraint on the abstractness of phonological forms. Then we reviewed the proposals for constraining the abstractness of phonological forms, Kiparsky's alternation condition, and then revised alternation condition or derived environment condition, and Joan Hooper's natural generative phonology. While natural generative phonology has come to be questioned on many of its grounds, and of course also supported controversially, some of the generalizations, such as derived environment condition, seem to still hold good, so that it is a principal distinction between phonological rules which are non-neutralizing and phonological rules which are neutralizing and give rise to abstract forms is predicted by some kind of a universal principle, which is the general aim of phonological theory. One is to predict generalizations by means of rules in individual grammars, and the other is to predict generalizations in terms of universal principles. And the abstractness controversy has given rise to an attempt to propose universal principles in grammar. Thank you.